All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first in what we hope becomes a series of technical sessions about Microsoft Azure, Microsoft technologies, and all the different ways that you can work with it. My name is Miguel Arcilia, and I'm going to be running this first session, which is going to be discussing a very basic topic, which is how to set up your first Azure subscription and also how to deploy some of your first resources on Azure. First, we probably want to start with a quick introduction of what Azure is. Azure is a cloud platform that provides computing, storage, networking, and artificial intelligence services and resources needed to build cloud-hosted applications. It's a very broad platform with a lot of services, and it really gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you can craft a solution to meet your needs. What we're going to be doing today is signing up for a free account and deploying a website or a web application in a couple of different ways. But the first thing that we need before we get started is an Azure subscription and an Azure account. When you go to the Azure website, which you'll see here, you actually can start off with a free account that gives you $200 of Azure credits that are good for about 30 days, as well as 12 months of access to free services, which are free, for the length of that subscription's free period. We'll go into that in a little bit. And I think this is especially useful because if you activate a subscription today, you'll be able to use it for one of our large upcoming conferences, Microsoft Build, one of the largest developer conferences that we host. And you'll be able to try out some of the things that you'll be learning during that conference. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is go to azure.com and click on Start Free to get that free subscription. Okay, once we do this, we'll be brought to our free account page, and we can click through the Start Free there, and we'll be asked to sign in with a Microsoft account. Now, if you don't have a Microsoft account yet, you can go to account.microsoft.com and click Create One. You can use an existing email address or create a new either outlook.com address, a live.com address, and sign in with that. Once you've signed in, you'll be brought to an Azure sign-up page where you're going to fill in a little bit of information about yourself, your country, your name, address and phone, and you'll be asked to identify yourself in a couple of ways. One is through your phone number. You'll receive a text or a call with a code that you can enter in here. And once you've entered your credit card details, you'll be able to validate your identity, or verify your identity rather. Now the credit card, don't worry about that one. It's going to ask for those details just so they know who you are, preventing any sort of fraudulent accounts that are being created. And it's not going to charge anything unless you require or request that that Azure remove a spending limit and start charging a credit card there. So if you put one there, don't worry. By default, nothing's going to be charged. Once you've done the verification steps, you'll go through your agreement. You'll click on the agree to the customer agreement, and you can optionally click to receive some emails and offers from Microsoft and Azure. And you'll sign up, and you will be greeted with a ready to start page that gives you your link to your portal, some of the details of your subscription, and even the option to watch some live demos and some broadcasts. So if you haven't done any of this stuff before, there's a lot of on-demand content that's there to help you out. Okay, so I'm going to go straight into the portal, and once I jump in, the first thing that it brings me to, since this is a new subscription, is the Azure Quick Start Center. The Quick Start Center actually has a lot of different ways that you can get started learning how to interact with different Azure services, from creating your first web application, deploying a virtual machine, deploying container-based applications. There's a lot that you can do here, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. So the Quick Start Center is a great tool if you're looking at a very purpose-built project. Okay, but otherwise, you can go straight into the Azure portal, and this is your homepage. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at the Azure portal, seeing what some of these components are, and creating some resources afterwards. I'm going to start from right to left. So we start here. The first thing that you'll see is your user who's logged in, as well as your company name. This is what we call your Azure tenant. If you sign up with a personal account, it may show you, your email address there. If you're using a company account, it would show your company name there. In my case, I have a company name. If I open this one up, you'll see that I actually have the chance to change different accounts. If I'm signed in with other accounts, I can switch to those very quickly. So, if you're signed in with multiple accounts, it's really easy to jump back and forth. We have a little feedback button here, just in case you find things, or you're happy with the experience, or you think something needs improvement. You're welcome to leave feedback there. There is help and support, again, where you can get access to some guided tours. You'll get to see some of what's new, you get to see what's in our roadmap, or you can file a support ticket if you have something that's very specific that you need assistance with. In our settings page, you can set things like the actual design of the portal. You can actually choose a different color scheme. You can make it very dark. I'm going to go with this one for now, but you have some customization options there. You also have a notification pane, which you're going to see start populating once we start provisioning some resources here. This directory and subscription filter is a way that you can actually use the same account and jump into different tenants. So like I was saying, a tenant is essentially a company or an organization that has resources. Sometimes you might access different tenants with different subscriptions. Sometimes your one account may have access to many tenants. In that case, you can actually jump into different tenants from here, right? We don't need to do that right now. We only have one tenant active, but that is something that we can look at. And this last one, it's not going to show anything right now, but it is what we call the Azure Cloud Shell. Now, the way that we can interact with Microsoft Azure is in a couple different ways. Like I said, we have access to compute resources, database resources, web applications, artificial intelligence. All of these services are in Azure what we call resources. And we interact or create and destroy and update these resources through a model called the Azure Resource Manager. The Azure Resource Manager, it's essentially a piece of software that facilitates the creation, updating, and deletion of any of the cloud resources that you create, right? So everything is called a resource, and we work with them through the Resource Manager. Now, we interact with the Resource Manager in a number of ways. The first one, and the most basic one that you start with, is this Azure portal. So this is your graphical interface where you can actually point, click, and view all of these resources and create them just using your web browser. So you can do it all in one place. However, some organizations may find that they like to automate things, or they like to write out instructions for how they create things rather than just always going to a web browser and pointing and clicking. In this case, they have access to a couple of tools. Some of them, one of them is called PowerShell, which is a scripting language that you can use to create Azure resources. The other one is the Azure command line interface, which we can actually interact with using this Azure Cloud Shell. So the Cloud Shell, think of it as a version of a command prompt. If you've ever, opened up the CMD command prompt on your Windows machine, you would know what that looks like. And it's a similar experience to what you would see here in the Cloud Shell. You would actually have a command prompt where you can issue commands that are automatically creating, updating, and again, destroying the resources that you work with in Azure. We're going to stick with the portal today. We're going to keep it quite simple. And we're going to start with creating our first resource. I guess before we do that, let's finish the tour. The next thing we want to look at is this homepage. In here, you have some of the Azure resources, Azure services that are available. So you can see your subscriptions, virtual machines, etc., etc. These are pre-populated with some of our most used services, but you'll see that as you start to use new services, this will sort of maintain a history of which ones you've been creating, which ones you've been visiting. Below that, we have our navigation pane, where we're going to see the subscriptions, our resource groups, all of our resources, and a dashboard. And below that, we actually have a couple of tools that you can use to make sure you're getting the most out of your Azure subscription. The first is Microsoft Learn, This is a free website where you can actually do hands-on training for a lot of Microsoft topics. These are very technical learning sessions, and a lot of them will actually be quite hands-on to the point where they will actually create sandboxes for you, so you can try creating some of these services and resources without having a subscription of your own. So that's pretty cool. Azure Monitor is a way that we can actually monitor our apps and infrastructure. We probably won't go into these other ones later, today, but they are quite important. Security Center is where you can monitor the security infrastructure for your applications and your other cloud resources. And Cost Management is where you can see, once you've deployed these resources and you start to get them running, you can see the costs that you're incurring with each resource. Now, you can do that here, but what I'm going to show you really quickly before we jump into resources is the subscription. Now you can see the subscription that we created, the free subscription, is already here. We have a subscription ID. We see that you, if you've created a free trial subscription, have been added as an owner, and we don't see any cost available because we've just created this. Eventually, as you start deploying services, you're going to see some costs come up in here, but again, don't worry. Once you hit the $200 limit, your subscription will be paused to make sure that we don't incur any costs there. So this is a way that you can monitor before you hit that $200 point. But still feel free to create a lot of these resources and start learning. All right, so with that, we're going to create a resource. Now, the first thing that we need when we create a resource is a place to put it. And in Azure, we have a term called the resource group that is sort of an encapsulation of any number of resources, right? Different organizations will have different approaches to how they manage their resources, but they may have everything inside one resource group. They may create resource groups per department that's using it. They may be creating resource groups per project of cloud resources to make sure that things are logically grouped. However you want to do it is up to you, but what's important is that you do have a group. So we're going to go ahead and create one here. All right. I'm going to create my first resource group. So I'm going to click on that add button. I'll add some of my basics. I'm going to put mine in a demo RG, and I will select my region where I'm going to be deploying. I'm going to deploy this resource group in a place that's a bit closer to me, Southeast Asia. Now, when you deploy resources within this resource group, they don't all necessarily have to be in Southeast Asia, right? But it is a good idea, sometimes to make things logically grouped, to have something like this. And you may decide to put a name, like the location or the region where you're deploying all of your resources, in the name of the resource group. That looks good. I'm going to go ahead to review and create, and I'm going to create the resource group. So once I do that, you'll see that there's a notification that popped up here, and you'll see that my notification tray actually shows me that a resource group was created. So I can go to this resource group from that notification, and now I have a place where I can start creating some resources. In this case, I'm going to create a very basic resource first. I'm going to start with a web application. So what we're going to deploy is an Azure web app. Okay. This is a hosted web app, so you don't normally when you deploy a web server, you might have to deploy a Windows server or a Linux server instance, and actually deploy an operating system onto it. We don't really want to do that. I don't think we need to worry about all that stuff. So we're going to go ahead and create a web app. Okay, so I'm going to give this a name. So I'm going to call this Miguel's site. .azurewebsites.net. Okay, so I can see that that name is still available, and I can see that this is going to be the name of my website. I'm going to publish. I can choose anything here. I'm just going to be publishing some static website code, some basic HTML code. So I'm just going to go with ASP.NET deployment. I think that's fine. And I will be deploying this again in Southeast Asia. All right. Now, when I deploy a web app, I'm also going to need to deploy an app service plan, right? You don't have to worry about this one too much. What the app service plan does is it's a container for one-to-many web apps, and you'll see that by default, it will recommend one of your production level workloads, okay? So in this case, there's the S1, which runs around $73 a month. Now, I don't really need something that's that big, especially for a demo. So I can go into my dev test workloads and I'll see that I have a much more lean option set here. I can run a web app for as little as $9.49 a month, or I can even run it for free on shared infrastructure. Now this one is very limited. You only get a tiny bit of memory, you only get a little bit of compute every day, but it is free, so it is there for a starter package or if you're deploying your first website. I might go ahead and try this one first, and then we'll see how we get on from there. Okay. Now one thing to note when you deploy a free instance of this website is that you don't get access to actually customize the domain. So if this Miguel's site.azurewebsites.net, it doesn't really roll off the tongue. If I wanted to do like miguelarcilia.com or something, if I wanted to put that sort of custom domain, I couldn't use a free one. So just be mindful of that. All right. But in the meantime, it will work for ours. Okay. I can choose to change the name of it, but I'm okay with this name for now. I can go with the default. I can create this. We'll let this validate. Let me create it. While this is validating, I'm going to very quickly show you where I'm going to be getting my website test code. So you can actually, if you've ever tried out Material Design Lite, it's a really great template for designing web applications. You can actually grab one of their template codes here. You can download, I'm going to download this blog one, and it actually does give you access to some basic website resources. In this case, I have an index.html file, I have my styles file, I have my images here as well. Okay, so I'm going to grab that one and just deploy it as a static website. Okay, so my validation is good. I'm going to create this one. We'll let that run. This should only take a few more minutes. You can actually monitor the deployment here. So if I go to my notification, you'll see that I have some notifications of completed actions and I have some that are running, right? So for a running one, I can see the deployment as it's happening. So I can see the deployment that's underway. It will actually give me a list eventually here of the different resources that are being created and the status of the operations, right? So let me refresh that. Okay, it's actually deployed quite a few of them already. All right. So we'll just go back here. Still running. Okay, we see that it's all good. So that took about a minute to deploy, or less than a minute. I think time goes a little bit faster on stream. Okay, so I'm going to refresh this resource group, and I'll see that I now have my app service plan, my application insights. Oh, yeah, I deployed the web app, right? Let me just double check that. Okay, there we go. So I guess it didn't show up in the portal right away, but I just went to the resource instead, and it brought me to my website. Let's just go back here and make sure that's showing up. Okay, that's the third one. So there's my app service, which is my web application, and we now see it running. So I can actually go to the URL of this website, so Miguel's site.azurewebsites.net. I can open this in a new browser, and it should show me a blank website. Okay, so there you go. So it's not a blank website, but it is your basic template website where it says that we're up and running, and what we're going to do next is deploy our code. Okay, so we're going to deploy our code. In this case, since we have very simple code, we'll go with a very simple deployment, and we're going to do it straight from within the app service tools. In this case, I'm going to go into the advanced tools. So you'll see a couple, before I go there, you'll see a couple of things that might be useful to you. I can see some of the key details of my website. I can see that it's in a running state, where it's been deployed. If I have an FTP endpoint, so if you use file transfer protocol to deploy websites, you'll see it there. And then I can actually also see some of the usage statistics of my website. Right now, I don't have any real server errors or anything like that. But as the requests come in, so if I guess if people start hitting this website quite often, I just refreshed it a few times there. This will eventually this requests page will start to show with actually some request data. Okay, Now here on the sidebar, there's a lot of stuff here. We don't need to go into everything right now. What we will go into is the development tools and our advanced tools. Okay, so I'm just going to jump in here. So our advanced tools is going to bring me to an external website. And this is sort of your management website where you can actually do some of the more lower level inspections on your web application. In my case, I am going into the tools, and I'm going to do a zip push deploy. What this means is it's going to take the zip file that I submit here, and it's going to unpack it and put it in the web server folder so that I can start serving the website. Okay, I believe I can just go ahead and drag and drop this. Okay, so I'm going to drag and drop a zip folder. Okay, and you'll see that it actually extracted, so I can see some of the details here. It did a successful deployment. This refreshed with my index.html file, all the files that I got from that website, and fingers crossed, hopefully I don't have to change any mappings on my images. But if I refresh the page, you'll see that the Miguel site has actually updated now from being a blank app service website, and it now has my website code. So this is my custom code that was very easily deployed using a zip deploy. Now, of course, there are much more complex ways that you can do this. There's a lot more advanced methods where you can actually automate the way that you're deploying to this website. But this is actually quite satisfactory for now in terms of me getting my first website up there. So if you're a small business, for example, if you want to deploy your first website, or if you want to try it out, maybe you're deploying something that can actually interact with your users, where they can contact you for new offers, or you might even have an e-commerce component where you're showing your store inventory online. You can use something like App Service as a very quick and easy way to get a web server up and running and to deploy your code to it. Okay? Now, before we close out, I'm going to just come back here. So I went back to my overview. I took a look at this, and you'll see that the stats have actually started to update. I can see that there's been a little bit of data out from some of the web requests that have happened. So 6.79 kilobytes, not bad. There were 7 web requests that were made, and I'm pretty sure that's really all me doing the refresh there. And I can see that my average response time was about 990 milliseconds. So it started out a little bit high, but then it went much lower, I guess, as the website started to settle in and be able to cache some of those files, or my browser was able to cache some of those files. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the static website. That's getting your first free trial Azure subscription up and running and deploying your first resources up onto it. Now, before I close out, I also want to show you some of the other things that are available to you that are free when you start your first 30 days, as well as free for the next 12 months. Okay, so you can go to this Azure free account FAQ page, and you'll see that we have a number of services that are free for a period of 12 months. And these include some of our intelligence services. So we have some text analytics services, a lot of these what we call our cognitive services that are available there. We have some free space, so managed disks. This is where you can actually upload actual hard drives, the hard drives that you would run on your web servers or your computers. You can upload those snapshots onto Azure and use those to run machines. You also have access to some storage, databases, bandwidth, even some of our basic virtual machines. So we have a general purpose virtual machine that is available for free for 12 months on your subscription. It's the B1S size, so we can go into the specs for your virtual machines in a little bit, or maybe in a future session. And we also have a number of always free resources. So if you're creating some cloud resources here, some of them only last 12 months, but some of them are free, for the duration, as long as you stay within the specific tier of that service. So for example, we have a managed database service called Cosmos DB that provides you 400 RUs, or reserved units, I believe is what we call that. and 5 gigabytes of storage. So as long as you don't exceed those usage limits, that's always going to be free for you. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, and there are a lot more that you can check out here, including, I believe, this website or this Azure web app should also show up here. Let's just do a quick search. Yep, there we go. So you're going to have access to 10 web, mobile, or API apps with 1 gigabyte of storage that are always free. So what we just deployed here, you can actually create 10 of these in your account, and you're never going to have to pay for what you run in that web server. So that's a pretty cool way to get started. All right, so that was our first stream. I hope you were able to learn something there. I hope you get to try out creating your first subscription, and we hope that you're able to take advantage of that just in time for build. You can save the date and sign up. We're starting build later this coming week, and I think it'll be really, really useful for you to get started doing some hands-on learning and really getting, kicking off your journey of working with Microsoft and Azure technologies. I think that's about it. Thanks very much, and have a great night, everybody. We'll see you on the next one.